Thank you very much. Yeah, those of you who know Regina know that she loves to travel, and so she's very sorry to not be here today. So I will attempt to do this. She's also not here for health reasons. If you hear me dissolve into coughing, I have a bronchial thing I picked up a few weeks ago in Panama that just wants to live with me for a while, so sorry about that. So what I want to do today is take you through a quick tour of some aspects of a large-scale project that we're doing at, well, for us, large-scale project at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County that is embedded within this larger scale project, the DigIn program, which is a National Science Foundation funded project to digitize wet preserved marine specimens. So specimens that live in jars kind of like this. This is sort of the nightmare scenario for digitizing things. It's wet labels wound up with the specimen themselves in a jar or in a vial, stuffed in this case with a nice lid, but sometimes with a piece of cotton stuffed in top. This is why this was one of the last major NSF digitizing projects to be funded, because nobody wanted to touch this with a 10-foot pole. So there we go. The goal was to create public digital records for over 7.5 million specimens from our nation's legacy of marine exploration. I could go on, but the idea being we want to get primary occurrence data for the marine wet preserved specimens in the United States, and that was the goal of this project. 19 institutions involved, 4 or 5 years. We're in year 4, I think now. We are going to be in year 5, possibly even year 6, we'll see. And the lead institution for it was the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. Why NHM as the lead? We are the problem child here. This is a graph showing the number of specimens that were estimated to be in the collections of the 19 participating institutions and what needed to be digitized, and we are the far left bar. So you got the problem, you get to solve it. So we were it, unfortunately. So what I'm going to talk about today is the digitization process that we did in our institution, which was different than that done at other institutions. As has been alluded to before, these digitization projects are very sensitive to the type of collection, the people, the capabilities that are present at each institution. So each institution in this program has had to come up with its own methodologies, and this is a bit about ours. So our collections are accumulated from many, many, many sources. We are the second largest marine collection in the United States after the Smithsonian. And the collections have come from very, very many sources. This is just the beginning of a list of about 150 sub-collections that exist within our marine wet collections. Many of those are, and you can say that last line, are expeditionary in nature. I'm putting quotes around that. And what we mean by that is anything where these are specimens that have labeling or identifiers that go to some external log of station location or locality information. So we're using expeditionary in a pretty broad sense, but the vast majority of our specimens have that kind of trait, which is typical of many marine specimens that are picked up on shipboard or at specific collecting stations. So what data did we want to collect? And our problem, as we started to think about how we were going to address this, is time. And here is the illustration of why. Our target was to digitize 320,000 of these wet specimen lots. And I'll mention these are specimen lots. In some cases, there are 500 specimens in the jar, but that is one digitizing instance. As was pointed out by our collection manager of Crustacea, Adam Wall, we needed to think about this in terms of every single specimen. So let us imagine we said, well, I mean, as we all know, collector name, that's really important. We would like to digitize that with each specimen. How long does that take? 20 seconds or so to type in, something like that. When you do the math, 20 seconds on 320,000 specimens is 1 full year at 40 hours a week, working 8 hours a day, maybe getting half an hour off for lunch. You get about a week vacation, that's it. Doing nothing but typing in data from labels. 20 seconds is a year of labor. So that caused us to take on an attitude that was very, very foreign to those of us who work in museums. It's an industrial process design attitude to this project, not so much a collection management aspect. First of all, skeletal data. Gee, it would be nice to get lots of the rich data that are all on the labels, but you know what? It's infinitely better to have some data about a specimen than none, because there is otherwise no digital record that these specimens exist. So Darwin core driven, these are basically the sort of fields that we were collecting, a very, very minimal approach to gathering the least possible, most useful data on each specimen. Optimizing parallel data collection also. So first of all, skeletal data collection, avoid moving jars whenever we can. We decided we were not going to be taking jars from the collection areas to some digitizing place and then bringing them back. Removing labels only if we had to read them. Physically collecting the data in one pass. We do not ever want to revisit a jar, visit the jar once. And revisit label photos if we have to recapture data that has to be done later. So, excuse me. We also have some access issues. The diagram here is a schematic top-down diagram of the shelving in the two main collection rooms where most of the specimens are. In that upper room, you can see the shelves. This is compact shelving that moves. We can open exactly one aisle in this room at a time. So that limits very much how many people we can have working in there simultaneously. The other collection room, this one is a little bit more flexible. It's not visible on the diagram here, but some of these are not locked together, as it were, so you can get a few more people in a few more aisles. But there's a view down one of the aisles in that top area. So we were able to conceptualize we could probably have 4 workstations working in each of these rooms simultaneously, so a total of 8. So we went about building these workstations, and we built workstations to roll into the stacks. So no specimens coming out, we put the people into the aisles to do the digitizing. Each of these was set width, obviously, that would fit, and each outfitted with what was needed to do the digitization in place. Specimen data touchscreen, these are Windows tablets running FileMaker Pro. Curatorial supplies to do the manipulation of the specimens. A barcode reader to read the barcode labels that are being introduced into each specimen as it's being digitized. And then a label camera for the instances where we did have to remove the labels and take a photograph of them. Provisioning those workstations, I said, 8 mobile workstations, essentially identical workstations. I also want to give a shout out to this project, if you guys don't know about this, OpenCore Legacy Patcher. As with many institutions, we have not a huge budget, strangely enough, and we have a lot of old computers sitting around. This is an initiative that allows you to put modern versions of Mac OS on ancient Macs and run them with reasonable security, therefore. And so this allowed us to use some of the really ancient machines that we have floating around for not the primary digitization so much, but offline data work. We were able to rehabilitate 2 early 2008 and 1 mid-2010 iMacs, and they are being used as I speak to do data entry for us. We needed to produce labels or identifying tags for this process. It's a lot of labels. We printed these in-house. As was alluded to in an earlier talk, cutting these labels, we looked at the amount of time to do that, and we said, no. And we started picking up a phone and calling commercial printing houses, and we found one that was willing to cut them for us. And so for the princely sum of $800, which is actually really trivial, and when you think about what time costs, we had them cut the labels for us. So this is the kind of machine that's used to do it. This is a laser targeted paper cutting machine with, I mean, this shot just terrifies me. I wouldn't have my fingers anywhere near there. So these were all cut for us commercially. And what we ended up with is a few 100,000 labels like this. 2 sizes, data matrix barcode on each one, double-sided. So we printed them, that's why we printed them in-house, so we could design the printing so that we could have double-sided labels. So those of you who work in wet collections, this action will be very familiar to you of trying to get the label to, yeah, we don't have to do that anymore, which is sweet. And an interesting and minor issue, but what typeface do you use for numbers on labels and why? And so we did go through a bit of an exercise of trying to think about the why. The why is when labels get damaged. How do you read the numbers best? And there's surprisingly little literature on how to design a good number typeface. So our criteria were that we wanted to be able to read labels that were mostly made to go away. If there was a fragment of the number left, we wanted to still be able to read it. This typeface, Bell Centennial, was designed specifically for telephone books back in the days when they were printed on paper. And this is the typeface that was used for addresses and numbers in those, and was designed specifically for readability at very small size. And it turns out that the shapes of those numbers are different enough from number to number that usually with very little of the number left, you can tell what number it was, which is not the case for many modern typefaces. We also put digitizing identifiers on the shelves. So every location of everything as we were digitizing was registered onto a shelf. We can just read that with a barcode scanner as we go along and then start digitizing the shelf because the person is sitting right there. So everything is registered to its location on the shelf and bank in the museum as we go along. So yes, this is speeded up film. We don't make our people work this fast. 8 of these running in parallel. You can see 2 of them in this aisle right now. You can see one of our digitizers who took a jar off the shelf is taking it out, doing data entry off a label, doing a tiny bit of curation, adding a bit of alcohol, putting the lid back on, and putting it back on the shelf. That's the basic action for one specimen. Again, collecting baseline data for each of these specimens. What shelf it's on comes sort of automatically, the specimen ID, the taxon, which comes from the location because these are taxonomically arranged. If it's not in the jar, we know what it is because of the shelf it's on. For those expeditionary stations, like this one, for example, the data entry is minimal. It is the taxon, the location in the physical location, and then in this particular case, it's that station number and then the year that you can see in the bottom right of that label, station number 1197-40. And those are the only 2 numbers that need to be entered for that because we have a log outside that gives what that station location is. For other situations like this particular situation, this is just, crap on a piece of paper. So we don't have an external log of this. This would be photographed. These labels would be taken out, put under the camera, photographed, and then put back into the specimen. And then we would transcribe this later offline. So how are we doing? Right now, our current rate, and so I want to be open here, because this is being done directly into a database, we know exactly when every record is created, and so this is kind of like the nightmare sweatshop scenario of, you're working in this environment. We actually don't share this with the digitizers. We just look at this ourselves on the back end to get some insights into what's going on. The top shows the number of specimens that our digitizers have digitized of late. The bottom is the amount of time per specimen that they're doing. Actually, it's specimens per time. We wanted higher bars to look better. So divided into 2 categories. The green bars are where they just do a direct data entry, so those are much quicker. And we're at about 35 seconds per specimen on that for primary data capture. The orange-ish bars are where they have to take a picture. And so that's obviously a slower process. That's about 107 seconds per specimen. So that's where we are on data collection rates today. So wrapping up, again, it became more of a mindset thing than reality of being collections management people. Skeletal data are better than no data. Working on minimizing physical action to maximize speed. Leveraging of external data. So on those labels that have all the expedition data there and a station number, we ignore the expedition data. We just get the station number. Optimizing hardware and software can work wonders because then you are doing things as efficiently as possible for the particular use case you've got. And also hire 25 great people to do this. We have 25 work study students working at a time on this project. So thanks.
So I think we've got time for one quick question.
I have a quick question. If I can get up fast enough.
I'll give you a quick answer. No. Yeah.
What program do you use to create the labels, the double-sided?
You're looking at it. It was a hacky, horrible piece of Perl code. And cool. Yeah, I'm happy to share it, but please don't look at it.
I use Entmo labels, so I'm sure it's maybe a little bit better.
It's probably better. I didn't know that existed. So
yeah, you should check that out.
Cool, I should.
use that for entomology.
Okay, great, thanks.
Awesome, thank you. So, thank you, Dean.
So this is me now. So I'm back. So this is a little bit part 2. We had hoped to have a little more separation. What I will do in this talk, since I saw there wasn't a whole lot of interchange at the door here, so I'm just going to keep rolling. Am I? I'm going to keep rolling. Hello, help. Yes. Okay. I will skip this right now because you just heard this. This is the project we're working on. 4 years, skeletal data collection, custom workstations, a whole lot of wet and preserved specimens to digitize. Once again, speeded up video. It's not that brutal. But there, actually, you can see the 4 workstations down the aisle there. That's as many as we can have in the Crustacea collection room at once. I want to delve into some of the guts behind making some of this work. That was a sort of overview of some of the more hardware-oriented kind of things. But this is all driven by collecting data. It's not driven by hardware. First of all, taxonomy. This is a big challenge. This is a century-old collection. Guess what? The names that are on the jars are very often not the names they should be today, blah, blah, blah. You know, you all are familiar with that problem. We are extremely fortunate in the marine world to have a community consensus nomenclator. The WORMS, the World Register of Marine Species, is an extraordinary resource for marine invertebrate names. Is it perfect? No, of course not. Does it have some taxa that are not so well covered? Of course it does. But overall, we're blessed by having this resource available. What we decided to do early on, after some really intensive work experiences trying to pull in names from worms and wedge them into our in-house taxonomic dictionary, we sat around a table one day and said, screw this. We're throwing out our in-house taxonomic dictionary today. We're going to migrate all of those old determinations to the worms determinations, and we're going to take on the worms name ID as our database ID. We're all in on worms. So we basically just downloaded the entire database, which is a little challenging, by the way. Talk to me about how ugly that can be, and made that the back end of our taxonomic determination system. What that means is, because it includes synonyms as well, people can pretty well match whatever they see on the label. It goes in, and then we can decide whether we want to report the essentially verbatim taxonomy or today's taxonomy for whatever definition of today you would like. So this was a very powerful way to enable us to both capture high quality data of what was on the label and represent it in a modern form. So we captured it, we turned it into our own database. As I alluded to, a lot of these are expeditionary records. So we were able to leverage off that, and this is the same example I showed before from this Valero expedition that we have approximately a gajillion specimens from. So in this case, it's a station number and a year. Another expeditionary one, this is an example from the Eltanin expeditions, which are some large Antarctic research expeditions. I don't know, this should be obvious to all of you, this label. It's, you know, the Eltanin expedition. The ELT tells you it's the Eltanin expedition. Station number 1003. In this case, that's all you need, it's just the station. Here's an example of some large survey type of project, things that were done where it takes 2 labels as long as you have that station, and you can see it's, again, bottom right, SMG 1452. As long as you have SMG 1452 in there, you're good to go. And what if you don't, though? So this was the other thing that we built in and were very serious about doing from the beginning, was immediate error detection whenever possible to the person doing the data entry. And this is expedition specific. So in this particular case, it's just triggered on the fact that I misspelled that first abbreviation. That one doesn't exist in this expedition. You got to fix that. And so whenever we could conceive of expedition specific error checks, we introduced those into the workflow and let the digitizers know immediately that they need to fix this. But as you may have guessed from seeing that Eltanin label and things like that, this is a pretty tricky endeavor. This is not something you can just cut people loose on. It turns out this process of diagnosing what expedition you're looking at when you're looking at a label is very, very challenging. We've ended up designing a whole bunch of training and a whole bunch of training materials for the people working with us, including essentially simulations of data collection with known data and having people go through these training exercises. There are about 35 or so expeditions that we expect our digitizers to be able to recognize and see. There's this manual that exists that they are using on a daily basis. This shows about 4 or 5 of the expeditions and the variety of labels that exist within each of those expeditions. So this is the basic expectation we have of the work study students that work with us. For all other expeditions, if you don't recognize it, you take a photo and it gets dealt with later. And that gradual qualification thing allows us to have people be productive from day one. If they're not qualified on an expedition, just take a photo. Just take a photo of the label, and then one of the experienced students later can just look at the image and digitize it as though they had just picked up the jar. So that allows us to use people from day one while training them on becoming more and more proficient. Getting those expeditionary logs, of course, has been a parallel process for this whole program. Expeditions are given an identifier. This, again, I'm alluding to these Valero expeditions. That has a particular identifier, Valero, strangely enough. This one, it's all typeset. It's really nice. Those of you who are familiar with, OCRing and digitizing things will look at this and go, oh, that's really, it's not that easy, actually, as you start to look in and see things are split on 2 lines and there's all that beautiful stuff. But it's actually relatively straightforward to digitize from a typeset volume like this. So those we've been able to digitize and have on tap. Some of our expedition data look like this. It's a little more textual, it's a little more descriptive, may not have been georeferenced. These we digitize on an ad hoc basis as we see that we have enough specimens from an expedition to make it worth digitizing the stations from an expedition. Then you have the nightmare scenario. This is the specimen log of Olga Hartmann, who was the polychaete curator for a number of years at the museum. And each specimen she examined has an entry in this log, and it's denoted by that eta and then a number, the far left, and then there's some information about it. Usually the locality, collecting date, sometimes other fun things. As part of this process, we do not plan on digitizing the contents of this. We have page images of the entire thing. Our first pass is, we are so sorry, but for each locality record, we're going to link it to an image of the page. If you are interested in trying to find out when and where that specimen came from, you're welcome to look at the page and figure it out. Obviously, that can be filled in later, and that would be an interesting project by itself to do later on. Those of you who are familiar with West Coast biology will notice in the far right corner, we have some collections from Ed Ricketts, who I don't know if you've ever read Ricketts and Steinbeck, but we do have some of those specimens kicking around. What do we do with specimen label photos? Well, case number 1, I talked about people who aren't qualified, who are taking pictures of labels that then need to be entered later. That's really simple. You just make an interface where someone can pull up the image and fill in the expeditionary data. The other example, of course, is where things need to be transcribed. So we have a transcription interface for that very minimal core information that we are transcribing off the labels. Why are we not using volunteers to do this? Why are we not putting it out? Because we have so few of them. We have only about 10,000 specimens like this. Those are being done right now, actually. So we can grind through that with our workforce fairly quickly. For the transcription, we're doing double data entry, and then there's a QC process interface shown here that compares the two for any inconsistencies. An expert person will look at it and decide what needs to be fixed to take care of that incompatibility, and then adopt the record as done. The other thing that we do is for all of the label images, they are taken as photographs with the data matrix barcode in them, but there's no other connection to the data record, it turns out, just because of the way we are doing that data entry. So you're watching my desktop now as we run a piece of software to read the data barcodes and file each image into its own little specimen directory, which is a very gratifying thing to see when you think about humans having to do this. You can see the images disappearing on the right. What also surfaces in this process is barcode reading is not perfect. There's a very small percentage that get misread. We are able to pick that up because we do have the exact time that the photograph was taken, and we have the time that the data record for that photograph was created. If those don't match up, it means something got misread. So we manually look through those later and fix those problems offhand. This one, I think everything got filed, but sometimes that doesn't work perfectly. Ultimately, we do a QC on each record, and the things we're looking for are, does it match the station data? Does it match some station somewhere, please? And number 2, is the taxon reasonable? These are taxonomically arranged. What you're looking at here is the end of a shelf in the beginning, and a shelf that has very few specimens, then the beginning of the next shelf. Do the taxa make sense? And by being able to see the full taxonomic hierarchy, we can pick up the instances where, for the digitizers, where they got a reasonable match to a taxon name that's really, really similar to what's on the label, but is actually in the wrong phylum, which happens. But when you see the full taxonomic hierarchy, that jumps out at you immediately, and it's very easy to correct and fix those taxonomic problems up. And so, for example, here, yeah, we're looking at one of these Valero stations. You can also take a quick look at the label, see if there's something wrong there. This, again, would have been part of the training. One would know this is a Valero label by the handwriting and the label size and the label age. Ultimately, our goal is to internationally share this data. So this is happening. We have the full pipeline to do that. Very few of our data are actually out at this point. We have a pilot set out, but shortly, over a period of the next few months, there will be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands following the initial groups that we sent out to GBIF to be publicly available. So a couple of things: ruthless skeletonization to get the job done, custom hardware and software. Planning at the outset allows for that data rendezvous at the end. We didn't start digitizing some of those expeditions until we were well on to digitizing the specimens, but that's all okay because we figured out how we were going to do that at the beginning, and now they're all matching up very nicely. You end up with mostly good data. You end up with a little bit of cleanup. There's some things that are obvious typos, someone screwed up, and you can fix those things up. You obviously end up with a few mysteries. And what we've had to be is very disciplined about not going down the rabbit hole of fixing all of those. We're leaving that for another day because better to get 99% of this stuff well digitized and 1% not digitized than not get it all done at all. I've spent my time talking about technical things because it's easy to do. But everything I talked about was interfaces for people. And that's actually how this is all working. These are some of the people who made this work. Janessa Wall at the top works remotely for us. She looks at every record and every photograph and figures out whether it's consistent, and for the photographs, which expeditionary kind of bin they should fit in. Victoria Westover and Caroline Haymaker are the people who have managed the training, developed the training, and manage this incredible staff of digitizers that we've had over the last few years. At any one moment, we have about 25 on staff, and that is an interesting management process. If those of you who've managed students who actually are in class as their primary job, it's an interesting thing to do. And so the credit for this goes to these people because ultimately we're digitizing for people. It's about biodiversity, but it's done by people, for people, and it's these people who get the credit for all of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Those two talks are fascinating, and it's really nice to see wet preserved specimen digitization because, as you say, it's something that we've avoided doing at MASS because it's a lot scarier than herbarium sheets and pinned insects for us. We've got time for a few questions. I'm going to ask a couple first.
But shout out to the pinned insect people. Pinned insect labels are a horror show too, so I just want to acknowledge that.
I was wondering, what software were you using to read those data matrix barcodes?
It's a library, ZBAR, I think is what it's called. It's a library available publicly and is integrated in again, a piece of crappy Perl code. You're seeing a theme develop here.
We've tried ZBAR. There's a command line bit of software called Bardcode Filer, which is paid, but it is brilliant. So in terms of the read error rates, it is much better than ZBAR from our testing. So I'd recommend it. Okay,
I appreciate that. I'll also say that I have to say when I look at the images that were misread, it's not their fault. It's like, oh, it would have been nice if you took that in focus, that would have been helpful, things like that. But yeah, I did experiment a little bit with that, but yeah, having the command line ability to just build a script that would just do this and I could walk away was really, really nice. Yeah.
And then my next question was, have you published any of the workflows or rate data?
We have not. So that's something that we're definitely considering doing as, sort of like the formal publication of what you just heard, our story at NHM. So no, we haven't. The rate data are pretty interesting because we do have pretty granular data for most of this, which makes it interesting to be able to ask questions about, is it about special people? Is it about special techniques, things like that? And interestingly, some of it does come down to special people. We early on realized there were a few of our digitizers who were much faster than others, and we actually asked their permission, and we just stood over them and watched them while they worked. And it was very informative. These are people who probably in another life could have been dancers. They just keep moving. They just don't stop. Actually, one of the little clips I showed over the woman's shoulder is she was probably the top scorer in that. She would just come in and things just kept going, and she never stopped, and it was remarkable. But there's also things that we've done, and we keep talking to the digitizers about when you're doing this, what pisses you off? What annoys you? You can't do this faster, and we try to incorporate everything we can from feedback from the people who are doing the actual work.
Thanks. And any questions from the floor? Go with Robin.
That was really interesting to see. What are you using for imaging the labels when you're having to take the photo? Because it looked like a very small unit that you had.
Yeah, it's in the photograph there, it was an early version, which was literally the cardboard box from Amazon in which the cameras were shipped. And no joke, it's a $100 document scanning camera.
Okay.
Because cheap, we had to do 8 of these. Yeah, I'll also say that part of our analysis was things that are good enough are good enough. And so this document camera, whatever it was, about 8 inches above, it's basically a fixed focus situation. We do not try to zoom in on images or whatever. It's a fixed field. You just put the damn thing in, take the picture, move on. And actually, I cropped those images. Because to be explicit, the tray is about that size. So most labels are just stuck in the middle of a really ugly white background. But it is perfectly good enough, and you can zoom in and read those labels just fine later. So
Yeah, we've got not a huge, but a small wet preserved flower sort of spirit collection for the herbarium, and it's working out how we tackle it. So it's been interesting to see how you're approaching it.
Sure. Yeah. I will also say that a key thing, that put it in a box because you don't want to have to worry about the ceiling lighting. So it has its own LED lighting. And because it's in a box, the ceiling lights don't affect it, which is critical because you often have to put a piece of glass on the labels to flatten them. Otherwise, they remain jar-shaped.
Thank you, Dean.